So welcome to Words Apart. Today we have Dan Glass. He is an award-winning activist who's gone over and beyond in representing the LGBTQI+ community and fighting for climate change. So welcome, Dan, to Words Apart. And next we have Min, who is a student here at SOAS who's interested in alternative methods of communicating. And she will be joining us today to ask some questions to Dan.
Brilliant.
Hello.
Thank you for having us, Min and Pauline.
Right.
No
Exciting
worries.
to have you.
So I guess the first question I think that Mim and I were definitely wondering is how you got involved with campaigning, and when was that first moment when you realised that you wanted to fight for other people?
A long time ago now. I think the first time that I realised deeply that there was injustice in the world, I always hark back to my nan, God bless her, because all my grandparents were Nazi Holocaust survivors, and like a lot of survivors came to East London, which is where I still am, and I just remember being, 11, 12, coming home from school, and when most of your mates are watching Grange Hill and you want to watch Grange Hill as well, but instead your nan opens up about her stories of surviving and escaping and what she went through, in her case in Poland and the Warsaw Ghetto, and it digs deep into your psyche, and I think from that moment really I had a real deep inbuilt sense of injustice. Not that I was particularly conscious or explicit about it, it just went into my soul, and I didn't become an activist then, but I knew how bad the world could get, and gradually over time I worked out how to put it into action.
What kind of made you go beyond just like
feeling
like this is something I experience, but I understand that there's injustice?
I guess where I realised that there was contradictions in talk and action was sorry, I've got a right cough this week. No, I've got some, thank you. Is because being a young kid, I knew that I was equally Jewish as I was gay. But in my biological family house, we talked about Jewishness and what happened in the war and how that's affected us relentlessly. Every show about the Holocaust, every article about the Holocaust, every film about the Holocaust, my mum and dad were on it. But I couldn't talk about being gay. And there's what's called a Holocaust hierarchy about which demographic story gets told. And of course, the Jewish story is told the most, but we don't hear much about the Roma story, the mental health victims, the queer community, etc., who were killed. So I was like, hang about, how can I talk about being Jewish and not about being gay? So then I realised that the ongoing journey of injustice and the importance to speak out and not be a victim, well, try not to be. So then I realised that actually there's still work to do. Because there's queer people being persecuted all over the world. I mean, Jesus, in the last week alone, with what's going on in Tanzania, and in locally in Britain with rising LGBT hate crime, there's so much to do. But I guess that's when in relation to your question, that's when I realised that there was a discrepancy between talk and action, and I know that I needed to do something. And in my synagogue, by the age of 14, I knew 4 kids who'd already killed themselves because of the silence around LGBT rights and being able to be who you want to be, who you are. And so me and my mates who didn't kill ourselves called it in a kind of jokey way, running from the synagogue to Soho. We basically legged it and went out on the gay scene in Soho, and that was for us survival, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. Again, I still wasn't an activist, but I was acting on the oppression that I felt.
So do you kind of feel like this contrast of being really able to speak about being Jewish but not about being gay kind of led you to kind of understand that needs to take more action, as why am I allowed to speak of one thing and not the other? Exactly.
And that all injustices are connected. In this case, racism, anti-Semitism and LGBT plus rights. And so slowly you begin to see the relationship between power and powerlessness everywhere, and how often the victims become the oppressors, or the oppressed becomes the oppressors. In my case, the oppressed, my biological ancestry, because of what happened in the Nazi Holocaust, but then were becoming the oppressors because they weren't talking about LGBT rights.
Yeah.
Or in my sister's case, weren't talking about sexism or women's rights, because coming from an Orthodox Jewish synagogue, it was very patriarchal. It was deafeningly patriarchal and sexist. Like, women weren't allowed to speak, but they weren't allowed to make the food.
Of course.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you begin to see the relationships everywhere. And also as a teenager, it was a constant process of running away from that because it was so oppressive. I got involved in, not really on purpose, by accident, because we used to go out on the squat party and free party scene in London, which was the best thing ever. And it's back on the rise, which is good. And back then, and then you learn about the relationship between space and power.
Yeah.
Like, who decides how people should use space? Why is space given to banks and luxury hotels when young people, youth services and clubs and bars are shut down? And also those squat parties, those free party spaces were often convergent spaces for anti-war protests or reclaim the streets. And so then I began to see posters on the wall of these squat parties about anti-war protests and meet here at this time against the war in Iraq, etc. So it was a kind of just keeping my nose to the...
Just all started to link in a circle and make sense.
Yeah.
And what do you think was one of the most defining moments for you when you were campaigning? Like, what was one moment which really struck out to you?
I think probably, and I'll never live this down, not that I want to, it was the supergluing Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, which was hilarious. It was the biggest news story in the world for that one day. Wow. And again, it links back to my nan. I could talk about how it links back to my nan. But I guess that was a defining moment because you really put yourself out on the parapet. I'd won this award for working with communities who are affected by environmental injustice, pollution, high rates of asthma and cancer, etc. Under the flight paths, in this case Heathrow and Manchester and Glasgow airports. And then I got this letter in the post from this awards ceremony, and the patron was Gordon Brown. And I was like, what's this about? He was the one who wants to expand the runways, and I'm challenging them. And I'm not going to accept this without making a drama out of it, because it's such a hypocrisy. And again, this is how power co-ops resistance. This is a classic example. So my mate Tracy, underneath the flight path, I was chatting to her about what can we do, and she was like, well, I know, when it comes to your turn to shake his hand, why don't you super glue yourself to him and read a speech out, and the world's media will all be there because it was in 10 Downing Street, and then it will highlight the importance of the campaign and the hypocrisies going on. And I was like, yeah, great idea. And she was like, I was only joking, don't super glue yourself to the Prime Minister. But anyway, that is what happened. He played it very well. I wouldn't have stuck myself to Tony Blair because he makes me believe in evil, and then you'd have to have chit chat with him, and I wouldn't be on.
Absolutely not.
Wouldn't be on that. But then, bless my nan, at the time she was in hospital, and I went and saw her after, and she was sitting there with all the papers on her lap, saying, in her hardcore Yiddish accent, Polish Yiddish accent, she was like, I'm so proud of you, Daniel, I'm so proud of you. And all the other old dears were sitting there thinking, what? I know what your grandson's trouble, but she just selectively didn't read a bit about the super glue. She just thought I was in the papers for winning the award. I didn't ever have the heart to tell her the truth.
Oh, really?
I'm so proud of you. And all the other old dears were like, yeah, whatever.
Oh. So what changed after that for you?
What changed after that? Well, there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes where my mate, involved in Plain Stupid, the anti-aviation expansion group that I was part of, said to me beforehand, he was like, Dan, remember this is a solo protest. And in a lot of the other actions that we did at the time, whether that's airport invasions or a load of us, not me in this one, but legendary action when they got on top of the Houses of Parliament and dropped a banner, they were all group actions, but this was a solo action. Even though my mates were helping me record it and everything. And he was like, is there anything going on in your life that you don't want to be made public, because the press will look at you, they'll look into who you are and expose stuff. And I become HIV positive 2-3 years before that.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the stage of being public, or let alone campaigning on it. And it was just something I put away in my head until I needed to think about it more. I wasn't on medication. I was fine health-wise. I didn't want to have to think about it. But then he was like, is there anything? And I was like, nah, because it was so stuck in my head.
Yeah.
And he was like, I'm going to ask you again, is there anything in your life that's going on that you're keeping secret, that you don't want out? And I was like, oh shit, there is something. Yeah.
There's that thing.
There is that thing. I thought, I'm going to have to, because if you're going to be public about things,
yeah,
you've got to expect the press to challenge you. So I thought, really, then the personal became political.
Yeah.
And even though climate change is personal to all of us living on the planet, this was super personal. And then I really started slowly to become more active and explicit about HIV and healthcare activism, because it was so personal. And again, being able to join the dots between them. And I think it can be really powerful as a human, as an activist, to speak about things which you impact you autobiographically, because you really can speak about the emotions, what it makes you feel like. You know, you can describe everything so vividly, but you shouldn't have, I think it's great when HIV negative people are activists in HIV activism, because we all need to be allies to each other's struggles. But yeah, I guess it's a long way of saying that's when I realised, how else we can be active, essentially.
Was it like, do you think it kind of forced you to confront something you weren't previously ready to? Or? Yeah,
big time. And you've got to wear your heart on your sleeve in many ways, and people relate to that, people connect to that. But yeah, it did give me a kick up the bum too, and that was really difficult. But in the long run, disclosing your HIV status, and of course it's World AIDS Day coming up, is difficult but so powerful, because any trauma, any internalized stigma, you're becoming your own worst enemy if you don't find a way to have an outlet for it, to release it. The whole concept of better out than in. And disclosing your vulnerabilities can be so powerful, because other people are like, oh, I'm not an idiot for feeling like that. I'm not a mug for thinking that. And I've got that too. And it combats that isolationism, which is the essence of like movement building. Oh dear.
No, definitely. And I think when we were looking at your work and what you've done, I think one of the interesting things that we found, because I think Mim and I have the same interest in this, in terms of using like creative mediums and like performance as a way of in activism.
Yeah.
So how do you use those mediums, and why do you think it's useful?
Like art or humour or comedy is for me a survival mechanism. In the whole concept, you're either going to laugh or cry about an issue, and if you've done enough crying, whether it's about racism or HIV phobia or whatever your injustice, it's so difficult. It's you can get really depressed. So for me, whether it's musicianship or like I said, comedy is a survival mechanism for yourself to keep your spirits up. B, can be a really effective way to challenge the status quo, the police, the state, because often, they know how to deal with marches from A to B. They know how to deal with militant protests. They know how to, and I'm very much in support of that. It's not mutually exclusive from art activism, but they often don't know how to deal with something which it takes the piss, essentially, because and another reason is like creative protest is a really good way to get your message out there and across. Like, for example, the most recent action we did with ACT UP, we invaded the purple carpet at the Bohemian Rhapsody premiere up in Wembley, mimicking Freddie Mercury. The kind of message was that they totally sanitised Freddie's sexuality and his HIV status, and belittled it
Yeah.
in terms of his sexuality and his living with HIV was a huge driving factor into his genius and into his legacy, but they totally kind of belittled it. And so we use that as a platform to highlight the ongoing issues with HIV stigma, cuts to services, austerity, etc. And it was shitloads of fun. And when people see that in the press, it connects with people because people like to laugh.
Yeah.
It's also a way often to not get yourself arrested all the time, because obviously at the moment in this hostile environment with the state becoming more fascistic, doing direct actions is more difficult if you don't want to end up in prison. So you have to find other ways. It's called the cul-de-sac effect of like, the cul-de-sac effect is it's just ending up in the nick. And if you want to be committed to radical social change and being active for the rest of your life, you've got to find other ways to be free.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I guess, so this process of you, like, being younger and more going into activism and then talking about HIV and having to do that because of the press and winning awards, especially getting to that point, do you feel a sense of responsibility now?
Awards are weird. He says, like, hosting the Sexual Freedom Awards tonight. Awards are weird because they're in danger of individualising it, of having a hierarchy of privilege, of who gets recognised. And actually, so they are weird. And I think it's really important to nuance their kind of awards mentality. But, you know, one thing I'm going to say in the intro speech tonight, you know, everyone's a winner. I'm definitely not going to say that. You know, awards is the icing on the cake to the huge movements who get recognised in any celebration of resistance. And actually, the most inspiring activists that I know, and I'm lucky enough to call some of them my mentors, are people you never hear about, you never want to be heard about, because for them to be a challenge to the state, and to challenge to the status quo, they don't want to have their name out there. They want to carry on being as intervening in the status quo, and therefore being like going under the radar, going underground. They're the most effective people that I know. But I've always been a gobshite, and now that I can't go back. I can't go back being underground. I can't do that. But just the point is, the most like incredible activists I know are under the radar, because that's how you have to be effective.
How does that make it more effective?
Because police infiltration is everywhere.
Yeah.
Police infiltration is everywhere. Like, I mean, you know, there's legendary and infamous examples like COINTELPRO in Black Panthers, but in domestically here in the UK, you've got examples like that. Can I swear?
Yeah. Can
I swear? Yeah, great. That bastard Mark Kennedy, who was do you know about him? He was a police officer who was an undercover protester, and the exposure of him and what he did kind of untangled and exposed a wider web of police infiltration. I was actually on that trial where it unravelled about him. So in 2008, I think it was, 144 of us were arrested because we were about to occupy and stop a coal-fired power station from running as part of the kind of climate camp movements, which are again on the rise, which is great to see. There's a protest tonight outside the Brazilian embassy by Extinction Rebellion. And anyway, we got caught before we did the action, partly because this fella Mark Kennedy was undercover as a protester who had relationships with women.
Oh my God!
And often it exposed the fact. And anyway, he was testifying. He was pretending still to be a protester when he was in court, and so therefore he was lying to the jury, and the whole case fell apart because he was a copper. And then that exposed the wider level of police infiltration. Currently, I think still 8 women are taking the government to court for state-sponsored sex abuse.
Really?
Oh my gosh!
Some of them even had kids with these undercover coppers.
Wow.
So, yeah, I know 1% of the level of police infiltration. And of course, we can't be naive to how the state works, because we're living in a turbocharged capitalist economy and mentality. They'll do anything to maintain that. Hopefully, we'll see the downfall of capitalism without the destruction of the planet very soon. But yeah, I guess that's in response to, how we can be effective. It's recognising and not being naive to the state apparatus, and therefore transcending that by not letting them know who you are. Yeah. He says on radio.
He says, heard it here.
And what advice would you have for other young people who want to get into activism and not sure how? Because I think it's quite hard to know what to do. I think you can have so many...
where to start, and kind of when you start to kind of have these like urging ideas and kind of coming, but not knowing what to do with that. I think that's...
And when your rent in London is £700 a month.
Exactly.
Just very practical things. I guess on the practical front, it is, my whole adult life I've been self-employed. I've got into activism, a lot of uni as well. I was at Sussex. Kind of want to come here. I'd love to go back and study again.
Yeah,
I'd love to.
come here. It's great.
This is so cool. I love it.
We need you.
I love it.
do.
What's the street in front of the main reception building? Has it got a name? The main kind of walkway.
The sort of campus, the main bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. It's really cool. There's
it's buzzing.
always great stuff going on. It's got a really good vibe, really good energy, and loads of wicked people. I probably wouldn't get any studying done. I guess, there's amazing people who are grounded in community activism and community transformation, who can guide you through the process. As power in community, as the old song goes, there really is. Build mentors. So whatever kind of issue which you're really passionate about, go and find elders essentially in the field, and say to them, I really rate what you do. You're an inspiration. You're 40 years ahead of me. Can we have a coffee or a pint or whatever once a month, so we can support each other, and I can learn from you and you can learn from me. And the worst they can say is no if they're busy, but most of that time they'll be honoured to help enable the new generation. And that's on every level, how you support yourself and inspire yourself to keep strong on spiritually, emotionally, practically. So that's one thing in terms of write to your icons and see if they'll have a chat with you. Try, and it's not easy in this current political housing crisis, live cooperatively and communally, to save money. And I think one of the other things is there's a lot of burnout culture. There's a lot of really unhealthy practices when it comes to, it's for the great things in life, playing piano, playing sport, whatever, which makes you a happy person. So it's not either or. Be an activist, but also be yourself.
Yeah.
Be a multi-dimensional, great, fun human. Otherwise, what's the hell's the point?
Yeah, definitely. No, well said.
Yeah,
that's really inspired me.
Advice.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess, a lot of the people who'll be listening to this will be at university. So I guess, how would you start being at university? Were you at university, and how did you start campaigning when you were there?
When I was kind of active in things before, mainly free pies, which are a form of protest, and anti-war protest, because it was the time of the Iraq War in 2003. But I was becoming very aware about environmental issues. I guess just thinking about the other thing about where do you start as a student, as a human, in terms of being active on things, it's often the things which really eat at our gut and eat at our soul, the things we find so painful to talk about, whether that's our lived experience of homophobia or racism, or the contradictions between our life worlds, whether, you might have been brought up with a culture of fighting against racism, but it's really homophobic, or fighting against homophobia and there's a lot of racism. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
sometimes the worst things I've heard, you know, I've heard the most sexiest things coming out of anti-racist activist mouths, or the most, do you know what I mean? It's the,
yeah, completely just...
Yeah, how it's like the relationship between the oppressed and the oppressors. So the point is, I think the things which you find most difficult to talk about and which makes you feel most vulnerable are actually the most powerful things which other people will resonate. So find people who you connect with and inspire you to be able to go through that process of better out than in and speaking about them. But I think just on a very practical level, I really want to write up like how, like the 101 of surviving, like financially, because you know, London's one of the most expensive cities in the world, and there are ways. I've had countless of shit jobs. Well, actually, I quite enjoyed a lot of them. When I was a student at Sussex, it's one of my favourites. I worked in a milkshake shop called Shakeaway in Brighton.
I knew Shakeaway.
Shakeaway's
yeah,
cool, isn't it?
Shakeaway's great.
I used to
And they have
dress-
all the different like chocolate bars.
Oh yeah.
And then you can
So unhealthy. I loved it. I used to dress up as a milkshake and stand in the street every Saturday.
Oh, amazing.
Really hungover. But you were in a giant foam milkshake outfit. I remember these rude boys coming up to me, and they were like trying to chirps me, and they were like, "All right, darling." And then I spoke, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's a boy!" And I'm like, "Mate, I'm a milkshake." Do you know what I mean? So I guess the point is, it's like you'll have to have loads of jobs. Like,
Yeah, you have to kind of go through it all.
you've got to graft, but if that gives you even just one evening a week to have the space to be like, how can I actively engage in the world with things which I care about? That's fine. That's great.
Definitely. I think there's definitely ways in London which you can do that. I think like we've been through really shit jobs and still are.
Yeah.
But I think it is worth it, I think, in the end. And also we're also lucky enough to be at uni and taking the time to actually study the things that we're interested in and using that to do other things. I think having an education in that sense is amazing.
And actually, the other thing related to what can you do as a student, I always used to say this cheesy thing, which my mate took the piss out of me about. Uni is a microcosm of the world we want to live in, right? So if there's unethical investment, if there's bad labour rights, if there's no recycling, if there's hate crime on campus, whatever the issue is on campus, challenge it here because you learn how to do it in the wider world. Again, but that's not mutually exclusive from actively getting involved in programmes in London, which is obviously what the Slice programme's about. Because, like in another life, I'll work on like the London Tourist Board, because London is incredible when it comes to an ecosystem of resistance. Yeah, of course, we're one of the most unequal cities in the world, but whenever you have such incredible oppression, you get such incredible resistance. And there's places all over London which get involved with. I mean, just to chuck a few out, you've got Gaze the Word bookshop just down the road. I think the last remaining LGBT plus bookshop in London, which got the plaque to Mark Ashton above, who was the kind of part of Lesbian and Gay Support the Minors. You've got Crossroads Women's Centre in Kentish Town, like an incredibly inspiring women's rights, anti-gender based violence community centre. You've got the George Padmore Institute on Stroud Green Road. Stroud Green Road. One of the last remaining radical Black history bookshops in London. There's so many.
Yeah, but I guess like I've never heard of any of these places, so it's just like how do you find them? And like because London there's just so much. It's so like it's quite hard to like get into. I think like the beginning, and I guess it's the beginning. You need to once you're in. I think not in, but when it's I think it's just the beginning part that everyone finds so scary and overwhelming, and kind of get lost in it and.
Definitely. And actually that relates to what about education. It's like I'm a big fan of the kind of concept of learn by doing, because it's easy to debilitate yourself into inaction by being like, there's so much I don't know, and there's so much out there. But just do one thing and then learn from it. What was good, what could be better next time. you could call them fuck ups, but you could call them massive learning curves. Like I love chatting about all the actions and the campaigns where there've been fuck ups, because you learn from that.
Yeah.
There's often they're not mistakes. They're,
of course.
They're learning processes.
Yeah.
And Paolo Freire, who's one of the, you've got Paolo Freire, Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, so many incredible educators out there. But Paolo Freire, the kind of founding father figure of popular education, which is people's education rather than what's called banking education. One of the key kind of tenets of it is learn through doing. And that's so important when it comes to engaging in community transformation. Don't beat yourself up about it. Learn bit by bit.
Yeah.
And be hopeful and just the best thing is to be in awe of the world, even though that's scary and terrifying. Being awe of humans' capacity to do great things. The book Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit is really good about that.
Definitely need that.
Yeah.
I'll put it on the little thing when I post this.
Yeah.
Right, well, I think that's it. I mean, I've got everything, all the questions.
Amazing.
Babylon
Yeah.
forever.
Thank you so much.
No, have a great evening, eh? Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
you
Thanks
too.
for the slice crew as well.
No, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.